evening, Jacob. We are looking forward to learning about this monument that I didn't know was here and know nothing about.
All right. Well, I'll be glad to educate you all. Does anybody want to take a guess without looking at your programs what this monument is? I'll refer to it in various forms. Tomb, monument, or cenotaph would be the best way I could refer to it. Does anybody know what this is dedicated to or commemorates?
Mexican War. Spanish, Mexican, American, Spanish War.
Mexican-American War. So, for those of you who may not know me, my name is Jacob Domalewski, member of the Friends of Fairview. If you've been here before, you've probably seen me in different attire. This year I've chosen to take a more contemporary route. I'd like to thank you all for your first-timers for coming out and visiting Fairview Cemetery, Stories Beyond the Stone, supporting our cause. To those who are repeat visitors to the cemetery, thank you for continuing to support our cause. Behind me are entombed or buried 10 men of the Mexican-American War. Anybody be asking yourself, why are 10 men buried underneath this monument? How was that done? What was the ability? And where and why and what is their story? So to tell this story, I have to reverse 10 years prior. At some point in your life, you may have seen a depiction of Davy Crockett as John Wayne, or my personal favorite, Billy Bob Thornton, in a depiction of the Alamo. So we imagine it, March 6, 1836, 160 men standing at the gates at the old Spanish mission in San Antonio, ready to give their lives for cause and purpose, in what is considered America's first southern border crisis. The immigration that had happened in the years prior were settlers coming from the United States across the plains and into Texas, trying to get land claims for cattle ranches. So these are men who are starting new lives but are not following the rules of the Mexican government established by Santa Anna. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, the president of Mexico at the time, and the general of the army. Three of the major rules that the settlers had to follow were that they must be Catholic, they must not bring slaves, and they must have working knowledge of the Spanish language. Instead, they are coming to Texas with slaves, not learning Spanish, and not converting to Catholicism. We know the story of the Alamo. We know their end. We know how Texas becomes its own sovereign country, presidented by Sam Houston. Almost said Samuel L. Jackson, I apologize for that. By Sam Houston. We know that they have their own navy, their own army, and eventually their own currency. We also know the country struggles throughout their beginning, and by 9 years later in 1845, they're annexed by the United States and become an official state and a part of America. With that, President Santa Anna has returned to power in Mexico. Now, in the years after the Battle of the Alamo, the surrender to Sam Houston, there was a melee with the French in which Santa Anna will lose his leg. Santa Anna, and this is a key part of the story just for novelty, it does not involve Indiana, but it'll involve our neighboring state, Illinois. Santa Anna will lose his leg in combat against the French. He will be exiled from Mexico. He will lose his power, but by 46, he will be returned as president of Mexico and general of the armies. In 1846, when Santa Anna returns, he decides we're going to send Mexican soldiers across the border. We're going to take back our claims at Mexico, and we are going to take back our Mexican claims in Texas, and we're going to reestablish the former empire. There's just one problem. Uncle Sam's not going to stand for that. So President James K. Polk sets out to start what is now known as Polk's War, or the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848. During that time, on May 13th, 1846, we send U.S. troops through a declaration of war authorized by Congress. This is a true act of war to Texas, and we begin fighting. Behind me is a monument to the honored dead of Floyd County who perished during the war. A total of 10. 6 from disease, 4 from wounds suffered in combat. After this, we'll walk around. I'll let you see the names and the ages. And I'll talk about the ages momentarily. The men of the Spencer Greys. Sounds very Confederate to us, but please remember this is 15 years prior to the Civil War. They are not a Confederate unit. They are named after Spier Spencer, a Hoosier who perished during the War of 1812 at the Battle of Tippecanoe. Now, the men of Floyd County that were belonging to the best disciplined militia group are the Spencer Greys. They are mustered into service, and on July 20th, 1846, find themselves in the 2nd Indiana Infantry Regiment, bound for New Orleans. So they get on ferry boats at the New Albany Wharf. They go downriver, like General Jackson did. If you've heard the Johnny Horton song, "Take a Little Trip Down the Mighty Mississippi." I mention that because when they arrive in New Orleans, the 2nd Indiana is put into camp exactly where Andrew Jackson and his men had camped during the Battle of New Orleans in 1814. So, for 10 days, the 2nd Indiana and the Spencer Greys drill, they train, and they get the call that we're doing the overland march from New Orleans to Mexico. They go through Texas. They cross the Rio Grande, and as they're crossing, they lose the first 2 members of their company. The 2 men die of disease. They are buried 12 miles from the Rio, and they cross into Mexico without them. The Spencer Greys see their first taste of combat on February 22nd, 1847. They might know what's significant about that date. You should know this. February 22nd.
Washington's birthday.
It's Washington's birthday.
Okay.
So the patriotic fervor at this time is we need to honor our founding fathers. You have to remember the revolution's less than 100 years in the past. 30 years prior, the young men who would be fighting in this war would have been the children of War of 1812 veterans. Think about that. They would have fought the British themselves. They would have heard the memories and the stories growing up in the frontier Indiana. So these men, with the idea of Washington in mind, the founding fathers in mind, go into battle at Buena Vista. Now, February 22nd, the battle spot, the time, and the conditions were all chosen by Santa Anna. He accounted for everything. This is where we will fight. This is the time we will fight, and this is how we will fight as Mexicans. He did not think that inexperienced American soldiers, and specifically militiamen from the frontier, would have any idea of how to fight a trained army of Mexico on their own territory. But he did not account for the fervor and the patriotic glory that they were hunting for to honor their forefathers. So, as Buena Vista begins, I want to set the grounds for who the commanders are. Overall commander of the entire army at Buena Vista, the United States Army, is going to be future President Zachary Taylor. Troops are going to be present from Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Mississippi, Tennessee. Mississippi is important because the Mississippi commander is Senator Jefferson Davis, who will one day be President of the Confederate States of America, and in 15 years be leading the country against the one he's fighting for president. Future Civil War General Braxton Bragg, who fought for the Confederacy, is going to be commanding an artillery battery. You're going to see the son of great statesman Henry Clay commanding the division that the 2nd Indiana falls under. Henry Clay Jr., that's his name, will perish while commanding that division. He will be one of the first statesman's sons to ever perish in combat, and the state funeral will be held when his body is brought back to Kentucky. With that, Indiana Hoosiers go into play. Shouldn't call it play, that was a basketball joke or a football joke. They had a game today. Anyhow, the Hoosiers go in. On their side are Ohioans, and the Mexicans come up. Of the 297 Americans who lost their lives at the Battle of Buena Vista, 90 of them hail from the Hoosier State. Santa Anna's men were able to drive the Indiana boys from the field, and it upstepped an Illinois regiment. They held the gap, they held the line, and the reason I mentioned Jefferson Davis earlier is that as Indiana soldiers retreated from the field, they were rallied by Jefferson Davis and his Mississippians. They turned around, and the company that was chosen to go back into line, well, the regiment that was chosen to go back into line, forgive me, that contained the company of the Spencer Grays was the 2nd Indiana. They went back in, they swept the field, they took the day. Now I want to pause here and tell you why I mentioned Illinois and the importance of that regiment, and also want to mention Santa Anna's artificial leg. This is a parallel because a few months later, Santa Anna and his men are resting in camp. They are roasting a chicken on an open fire, as the story goes, and he has taken off his prosthetic leg to rest. They get word that just a few miles away are Illinois soldiers. They are coming quickly, and we need to get out of here. They abandon their camp, they abandon everything that was not necessary, and they get away. However, they left the chicken and Santa Anna's leg, and Santa Anna's leg was captured by that same Illinois regiment that saved the day as the Hoosiers' line fell in 1847. Today, you can still visit Santa Anna's artificial leg and the war trophy of the Mexican-American War at a museum in Illinois. There have been efforts to return that to Mexico. Thought that would be a nice little lighthearted change up before we get to the rest of the story. The monument we have behind us, the cenotaph, was erected during the war. So in 1847, after the Troop 4 had fallen at Buena Vista, the citizens of Floyd County said, we need to hold tribute to our honored dead. So they privately funded this monument. They erected it here in the northern burial grounds at the time, or Fairview Cemetery as we know it today. And they inscribed it with the names of everyone who had perished while away. If somebody died, they added the names. In total, 10 men of the Spencer Grays died while on campaign in Mexico. 4 died at Buena Vista in combat. 2 died along the Rio Grande and are buried at a cemetery there. And 4 more died, sorry, I just lost the count. Yeah, 4 more died while en route to Monterey, finishing up the Mexican campaign. Their bodies would be brought home. They were received by the city on a steamboat. They were brought from the wharf. A ceremony was held, and the monument was already standing. It was completed that same year in April of 1848. Now you're probably asking yourself, this man mentioned 10 people were buried underneath, but only 8 came home. During the 1860s, 2 New Albanians chose to be buried alongside of their brothers in arms. They felt so connected that they didn't want to be buried without being there. So on the back side are 2 names inscribed for the 2 gentlemen who chose to be buried later in life with their fallen brothers. At this time, if you're willing and able, I'd like for you to get a full scope of the monument, just to see how they constructed it, and to see the ages and names of the men of Spencer Grays who perished. So in the front you have the citizens of Floyd County here erected this monument in memory of their honored dead. Glory is the soldier's prize, and the soldier's wealth is honor.
So are they like in caskets, like on top of each other, or are they just thrown in their bodies?
I think there are caskets. There's no documentation.
So how did they get them in there? Like,
they're buried at the feet.
so that was open?
Yeah, so this monument was already here, and then they would have buried them where we're standing.
Oh.
If you can come to this side first, we have the names of Lewis, Howard, Morgan, and Cunningham, are 4 who died en route to Monterey. Their ages span from 18 to 22. Beneath is Welker and Tyler. They were 19 and 37.
Wow.
They're the 2 that never returned home. They're buried on the Rio. On the back side, we have McLaughlin and Garner. The last two was buried in 1868.
So they're really not buried underneath.
No, the monument was here, so they're not underneath. They're buried alongside. And then finally, Francis Bailey, Apollo Stevens, Warren Robinson, and Charles Goff, ranging from 23 to 35, are the dead from Buena Vista.
So now in the picture, this was the urn that was on top, and
Correct.
then
So
some
there used to be a
person
tree.
knocked it off. I mean,
The tree that extended over top knocked it off.
oh, okay. But that
So
was
that's the urn. That's the urn that used to sit on top.
and it stayed inside.
Yeah.
Wow.